Okay, please, moving on now. We'll move to brush control strategies in the Pacific Northwest, and your speaker will be Wes Wasson from the Helena Corporation. He's also past president of your WVMA. Wes, you there?
I am here. Forgot to hit my mute button. Sorry about that. You can hear me?
Yes, we can. Good morning.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate that. And like Jim said, my name's Wes. I work with Helena Agri-Enterprises, and I get you for the next half hour. Let's see here. Why is my screen not advancing? There we go. So outline for today, what is brush and why control it? What are strategies? Herbicides used to control brush, timing of applications, and examples for a few specific species. Okay, what is brush? Well, it can be, it's a shrub, right? I'm distinguishing it from annual, even perennial broadleaf weeds or grass, mostly woody type things. Can be an invasive species or noxious weed, or it can just be anything that's a nuisance in your way. Examples of that include safety, line of sight. Generally, we think of that as a road side issue. But you know, I have friends that have horses, and you know, they live in a community that has trails, and they ride hard. And you get going down a river bottom that's full of 15-foot tall willow, and you can't see around a corner. You know, it can create a dangerous situation. So safety doesn't necessarily have to do with automobiles. Can be a trail as well, or other things. Another safety thing is power line right-of-ways. Maybe this safety part is removed one level, in that you know, if the power line goes down, of course we may or may not be able to keep power. So you know, power line companies are pretty concerned with that sort of thing. Keeping right-of-ways open for travel and maintenance, keeping brush from damaging structures. I know I took too long on my house several years ago about getting rid of some tall rhododendrons that were growing pretty tall. And a windstorm, they kind of beat up my gutters. So you know, in that way, it was just a matter of cutting them, but it can be an issue. Other things, habitat management, grazing or crop management, might be just blackberries along a fence row that are starting to expand in where you didn't want them. And also reducing fire hazard, especially around structures and or communities. You know, some of those, some of that brush, when it dries out a little bit, can be a little more of a fire hazard. And then you have species like gorse that are actually flammable too. So let's see. Okay, here is a very incomplete list of brush species. I'm not going to talk about all of these today, but just kind of wanted to put this up here as an example. Some of these are actually trees, but when they're smaller, we treat them as brush. I even have conifers on here. Conifers are We don't often think of conifers as a brush kind of thing, but they can become a problem, especially, say, for instance, in a ditch line where they can hang up solid pieces of grass or limbs or that sort of thing and plug a ditch. And next thing you know, instead of removing conifers, you're fixing a gravel road or something like that. Okay, what are strategies? Well, strategies depend on what situation you're facing. It's not possible to address all situations here today, but I'd like to talk about a few, and mostly just to point out what kinds of differences people face when they're addressing a brush issue, and specifically how that can change the strategy of how you're going to proceed to achieve your objectives. You may have a roadside right of way where pretty much all the brush is targeted and kind of in that zone 2 area. And keeping grass is part of an IPM strategy to discourage more brush germination. Or you may have a prairie restoration where native broadleaf plant species are desired. A broadcast application is probably not going to meet your objective. So the example I think of is there's prairie around Thurston County where Scots broom loves to grow. And if you want to keep some of the native broadleaf flowering plants, you have to be careful about how you control the Scots broom. A power line right away where low growing or slow growing species of brush or plant, herbaceous plants are desired. Again, in that situation, the broadcast application probably won't meet your objective. A trail system where a noxious weed is targeted. Even different species mix on a location. What's the mix of species you're targeting? And that might change based on location, elevation, aspect, etc. And there's many other situations. So each one of these is going to be a different strategy on how you approach it. Okay, so we have a strategy rule of thumbs. It's my premise that it's best to use herbicides when plants are relatively small. Minimizes off-target damage, and you use less herbicide if you're only spraying 2 feet tall versus 10 feet tall, right? And then matching an application cycle to the target's growth rate. So if you have a roadside brush situation, maybe you want to spray that every 3 years. And then what you would do is divide out your management area into 3 sections and spray one of those sections annually. What that gives you is a predictable target vegetation height and therefore predictable spray height. And so you end up doing something similar every year in a different location. You have to kind of decide how high you want to spray and set up the cycle to target that. Okay, so this is a incomplete list of herbicides, and I guess I should mention, this presentation is going to be decidedly towards herbicides. I understand that there's different ways of approaching brush control, including mowing and cutting and other hand operations. My responsibilities at Helena are partially for stewarding products my company sells. So that's more of what I'm presenting here today. And, you know, a lot of the mechanical ways of controlling brush are fairly obvious, and I think you guys can figure that out for yourselves. But I want to make an effort to make certain that people understand the herbicides and how to use them. So I've separated these products. The ones on the left are selective, and so those don't target grass. Those don't kill grass. And the ones on the right are more broad spectrum. The imazapyr, which Polaris, glyphosate, Roundup, they have a much broader spectrum of what they control. So the strategy there would be different somewhat. The other thing, well, I also wanted to just quickly mention, I'm going to use trade names mostly in this presentation: Garlon, you know, Escort, Milestone Method. To the extent that there's other products available, I'm going to apologize up front. I'm not trying to minimize anybody's products out there, but it's just easier, and I think understood by more people when you use a trade name that's a popular name. Having said that, triclopyr, known as Garlon, that's the name I'm going to use more often than not. And then, of course, there's different formulations of triclopyr. There's amine salt, choline salt, there's esters. The salts are very different from the esters in terms of the salts don't volatilize as much. Not nearly as much. They also mix in water much better. They don't require an emulsifier, whereas the esters require an emulsifier because you're trying to put oil in water. An emulsifier is kind of like, it is like dish soap. If you've got a pan that you've cooked a stir fry in, you got olive oil in it, you put some dish soap in it and put water in it, rub it around. An emulsifier is a molecule that one end is attracted to water and the other end is attracted to oil. So voila, your pan full of olive oil is clean because of that emulsifier. Well, that's how esters mix in water. It's the same. That inside that Garlon 4 jug is an emulsifier, and that allows it to mix in water and not just drop to the bottom. Oil-based herbicides like Garlon 4, the ester, tend to work a little better, especially on tougher leaved plants as a foliar application, because they you can use an MSO surfactant, part of that oil in the ester formulations acts as a surfactant. So when you compare that to, say, Vaslan or Garlon 3A, which are both salts, it's more difficult to control a tougher leaved plant with the salts. In general, I'll talk a little bit about surfactants today, but not much. A traditional non-ionic, our product Induce, is one of those, is more aligned with the salt formulations, the 3A, the Vaslan, and the MSO or MSO silicone blends like a dynamic is more appropriate most of the time for an ester formulation. Tricera is also a triclopyr. It's a little bit different in that it's a free acid. It's not an ester or an amine, and it does mix well with MSO, but it doesn't volatilize, more like the Garland 3A in that regard. And so a little bit different that way. It's kind of a combination. 2,4-D is very common product. Again, salt formulations and ester formulations, and then hardball is the free acid formulation of that. Metsulfuron is Escort XP. And then we have aminopyrrolid, known as Milestone, aminocyclopyrrochlor, known as Method, clopyrrolid. Not a big product for brush, I will say. I do have it in here, but it's a very narrow species mix that it controls. Fluroxapyr, Vista XRT, and picloram. And I guess at this point I might mention I am least confident on my rates on picloram, and I've probably missed some uses for picloram. I haven't sold a lot of Toradon in the past several years, so I tend to forget some of these things, and I did my best to look up rates and that sort of thing, but I'm probably the least confident about that. So anyway, that finishes the list of what we have for the selective herbicides. Okay, timing rules of thumb. Brush has to have leaves for herbicide uptake. That's a rule of thumb. Kind of obvious, but you know, there are other ways to apply herbicide: basal applications, cut stump or frill applications, and you can widen your window, timing window, with those types of things, those application types. Here for this presentation, I'm primarily going to talk about foliar applications. Number 2, plants move sugars and nutrients to the shoots after spring bud break and to the roots in late summer, early fall. If complete control is desired, the roots are the target. You don't want the roots resprouting, especially with glyphosate, imazapyr, and metsulfuron. That timing with the synthetic auxins, they're a little more effective at earlier application times compared to sulfuron. You can get away with earlier in the spring, and kind of what I notice is after the plants stop growing, the synthetic auxins, which are, except for metsulfuron, are pretty much all of those herbicides that I had listed on the left side. 2,4-D, Garland, Transline, aminopyrrolid, all of those are synthetic auxins. So you can get away with a little bit earlier and probably need to avoid spraying as plants start to shut down in the fall. And there are always exceptions. So now I'm going to go into some specifics, and I'm going to start with conifers, because the first timing rule of thumb exception is for conifers. The best time to apply is when the new growth is, like in that picture there on the right, is between 2 and 5 inches. That picture is when you start. New growth is succulent and takes up herbicide readily. Outside of that timing, if you're going to wait a little longer into the summer, into August, a heavier dose of surfactant is required. And you probably want to use one of the products, if you're going to use a synthetic auxin, mixed with MSO surfactants, and they have the better penetration characteristics. Conifers are most sensitive to Escort XP, Milestone, and of course Openside is a combination of those two. If you have Escort at, or if you have Openside at 3.3 ounces, that gives you 1 ounce of Escort XP product and 7 ounces of liquid Milestone product. It's a good product for conifer control. It gives you a combination of 2 different products. Method 240SL is also very effective on conifers. The problem I see with using that, you know, if you've got a lot of conifers, it's probably because you, say in a ditch line or something, it's probably because you have a lot of conifers as desirable trees as well. And root uptake with method 240SL is a concern for desirable plants in general. And so I just want to make sure I express this warning carefully. I guess a quick story I do Christmas trees as well, and we were trying to figure out the interactions of root rot for noble fir Christmas trees. And so on one of my neighbor's tree farms, we brought out a fire truck and hosed down 18 inches of soil in a, I don't know, 30 foot by 30 foot square. And so we could follow the roots and see where they went, and you know, without digging and disturbing them. A 5 foot noble fir tree oftentimes had roots that extended 15 feet. So 3 times the height of that tree was how far those roots went. And it really surprised me. It's a planted tree, 5 feet tall, about 5 years old. Roots went out 15 feet. Pretty amazing, really. So anyway, enough said on that warning. And conifers are also sensitive to Tordon 22K. This is an application near Glenwood, Washington. And this included 64 ounces an acre of Garland 4, 2 ounces an acre of Escort XP, 5 ounces of Milestone, and 1 quart per 100 of 1 quart per 100 gallons of mix of dynamic surfactant, and all sprayed at 25 gallons per acre. This was done at the right timing. These, well, there's both pine, Douglas fir, and there's some maple in there as well. But there's a great timing on the conifers in there. You know, they probably had 5 inches of new growth, I think, and controlled it really well. And thanks to Juan for this picture, and he did the application there. So this was I want to thank Bayer for this data as well. This was a 17 ounce acre method, 240SL. It's aminocyclopyrrolachlor and 2 ounces per acre Escort XP metsulfuron with an MSO surfactant, and applied in September, end of September 2011, and photos are taken the following June. Target species were cottonwood, elm, willow, serviceberry, rabbitbrush, clematis, leafy spurge, thistle, houndstongue, knapweed, and some red cedar. So that's why it's in here, conifer. And there we go. like I said, it was on a levee, and you can see with the method, there's trees here that weren't damaged. Not sensitive, or not enough of the roots are going into the compacted levee. Most of them are probably going the other direction. So those trees tolerated some root uptake without really any real visual effect there. But you can see the brush is controlled really well. And I don't really see the cedar in there. I'm told it's there, but it's hard to pull that out of that picture. Poison oak, most sensitive to glyphosate, 48 ounces an acre is probably a good rate. Tordon 22K, 48 ounces an acre. Polaris AC Complete, 6 to 8 ounces an acre. Garland 4, a little bit less, poison oak's a little bit less sensitive to that. 2 quarts an acre is a good rate for that. Also, surfactants are important with poison oak. It's a little tougher leaf. It's pretty oily. That's the poisonous part, right? So glyphosate, I would just use a glyphosate with a surfactant already in it, like a Roundup Pro concentrate, Cord XRT2, that sort of thing. The rest of those products, an MSO-based surfactant is probably best. Either MSO itself or MSO silicone like Dynamic work really well on poison oak. You'll note Polaris AC Complete is a salt formulation, but most of the Imazapyr products, at least that I would sell, have a lot more emulsifier in it. And you can tell because if you mix it straight with MSO, it turns white, and that's the emulsifier working. So there are some salt formulation products, and it's hard to know. You just have to ask questions to know. But like Polaris AC or Polaris SP has even more emulsifier in it. And so those are salt formulations that work really well with MSO surfactants. Evergreen ceanothus. Again, this is an evergreen species, so surfactant is going to be important, and oil is, with these 4 herbicides, MSO products are probably the best. Garland 4 at 48 ounces an acre. LV6, which is ester 2,4-D, 2 quarts per acre. Vista XRT, and XRT in Corteva speak is an ester formulation. In fact, there's a Garland XRT that is quite a bit more concentrated than Garland 4. Both of them are esters that you can use interchangeably, but not at the same rate, because the Garland XRT is more concentrated. The Vista is fluroxapyr, Vista XRT at 22 ounces an acre, and then Polaris AC Complete, somewhere in the 16 to 24 ounce an acre rate. Scotch Broom and Gorse. This picture is taken, was a spray to cover application of 3% Tricera. Garland 4, both of those products are triclopyr based. Escort XP actually works pretty good at 2 ounces an acre with MSO or Dynamic. Combination of Escort and triclopyr works really well. Also, Open Site at 3.3 ounces per acre is Milestone and Escort combined. Milestone by itself does a reasonable job on
Wes, sorry to interrupt. This is just your quick 3-minute warning.
Holy smokes. Wow, you're right. Thank you. Let's see. Yeah, Milestone by itself does a pretty good job on Scotch broom. Blackberry, most sensitive to Garland 4, and Escort does a really good job. Vista does a really good job, and people use it where Ponderosa pine is a desired species. If you hit it at the right timing, like mid-September-ish, you won't harm the Ponderosa. And I like glyphosate and Garland mixed together for blackberry. That combination might actually be antagonistic on some species, but blackberry, it seemed to work really, really well. This is a little bit of research that was done by WSU in Burlington, Dr. Steve Seefeld. And we were comparing Tricera with Garland. Tricera is the orange bars, Garland is the gray bar, and this was full bore Scotch broom, and both at 64 ounces an acre, rate per rate. Tricera performed similarly to Garland 4, similarly to Tricera. That was Scotch broom. This is blackberry, Himalayan blackberry, and you can see at 295 days after treatment, pretty similar control, 100% for blackberry here. And I've got, well, red alder, LV6 2,4-D.
Sorry, Wes, now we're at our 1 minute.
All right. I'm going to wrap it up for a quick question. Do you have any, Taryn?
I do. So I had, what is MSO?
MSO, methylated seed oil. You can also get ethylated seed oil. And basically, it's a plant-based oil, likely soybean-based. Not all that much different than what you cook your French fries in McDonald's, but methylated so it doesn't separate. And a really good penetrating surfactant as long as it is matched with a herbicide that it mixes with well. Anything else?
No, but thank you, sir.
Okay, well, thank you very much, folks, and I apologize. I talked more on a presentation. I don't know if that's because of the virtual format or not, but usually this many slides I would have went through in 15 minutes in person, so a little different. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wes. Appreciate the information that you've imparted.